Okay, the recording should be starting, so whenever you're ready, Dr. Fernandez.
Okay. Well, hi everybody. My name is Alejandra Fernandez. I think I know most of everybody on here. Maybe Ibun, I don't know. But I've met Namisha. She was here, and most of the other people here are my summer scholars. So it's good to see you all again. So today I'm going to just go ahead and share my screen. And hopefully you could just see my PowerPoint now. So today I'm going to be, oh, I lost you all. Here we go. So today I'm going to be talking about family functioning and how that influences the adolescent environment, how it influences their behaviors. And so it's less health outcome focused and more of like the mechanisms that work underlying some of these associations. But before I do, I just kind of want to briefly introduce myself. I'm here at the School of Public Health. I'm an assistant professor. I'm from Texas. I grew up here. I'm actually from Mexico, but I grew up in Texas. And I did my undergrad at A&M, and then I did my graduate school at UT Austin. So I'm kind of like playing for both teams here. So, um, but that's okay. So let me go ahead and get started. So family functioning is kind of this umbrella construct that has all of these different behaviors that fall underneath the umbrella. But in reality, it's kind of developed or it has been conceptualized based on a couple of theories. There's actually lots of theories related to like adolescent development, child development, parenting, and things like that. But when I talk about family functioning, what I'm really talking about is the theoretical frameworks, particularly related to the family systems theory and the socioecological theory, so that I kind of conceptualize family functioning in those realms. So family systems theory is just a theory that suggests that adolescent behaviors, or really any member of the family, is influenced by other members of the family, and their behavior all kind of connects. It's bidirectional, and so they just work as a system. So if something bad happened to one part of the family member, like it would have some kind of like a ripple effect to other members. And then the socio-ecological model is the model you see here on the right. And it could be any individual, but because we do adolescent pediatric work, the child and the child and its behaviors and their well-being is in the middle of this model. And then there's these different levels with different proximity to the child as you move out. And you have your parents, you have your school, your neighborhood, and then just kind of like the overall societal norms of surrounding the child. But the parents and the family are very proximal. They're the most proximal level to the adolescent. So it's kind of like in a sense that they have like the most influence on the adolescent, especially during different developmental time periods. So I use a socioecological model a lot in my research, and there's a lot of support suggesting or supporting that this is the case, that the family does have influence, and there's a lot of research suggesting that different levels or different behaviors of the family, the parent, the sister, everybody, brothers, and things like that have an influence on the adolescent. So, any questions? And you can stop me at any time and ask questions or anything like that. So also in that sense is you have to kind of take into account kind of parenting research, which is kind of its own realm of research. I'm not like a parenting. I don't try to tell parents how to parent. But you have to take that into consideration when you're looking at family functioning and how interventions work. using family functioning. So really like the two there's four different types of parenting styles, but when we talk about parenting styles, the most common are really these first two parenting styles, authoritarian and authoritative. And authoritarian is characterized by a parent who requests obedience from the child. They may implement punishments if the child doesn't comply. There's a lot of discipline in their parenting ways. And then kind of like the juxtapose of that is authoritative, which is considered like a positive parenting style where you do a lot of communication. There are rules and you do enforce rules, but not through like punishment or anything like that, through other means of reinforcement. And then there's also permissive, which is kind of just like a parent that doesn't have any rules, that may let kids just do whatever. And then the uninvolved parent, which just they're not involved in the child's life. They don't nurture the child, they don't pay attention to it. And so really most of the time we're just talking about kind of this authoritarian and authoritative parenting styles. One thing to consider, though, is that authoritative is what we consider the ideal parenting style, but authoritarian is really kind of prevalent in some of these more collectivistic cultures. So, like the Hispanic culture is very authoritarian. The Asian culture is very authoritarian as well. And there's something to say about these cultures having kind of this, if people may know about the Hispanic paradox, where we see a lot of Hispanic kids have better outcomes in certain realms. And you wonder, like, why is this happening? And sometimes it's like this idea that the family is very protective, but also they're implementing like authoritarian parenting styles. So there is kind of like this mix of both authoritative and authoritarian that may work for some kids. So it's although it may look like it's like black and white, one or the other, there's maybe some like gray area across all of these types of parenting styles. Okay, so I'm going to post a link in the chat. And what I want to do is I've kind of talked about what family functioning is, but because it's such a broad term, and I know that some of my summer scholars may already have some of these like words ready to go, but I'm gonna post the link and then it's gonna come up to a Padlet. And I just want you to kind of brainstorm some behaviors that are like family level behaviors that you may consider like family functioning behaviors. And you'll see that there's one, a lot, and two, there's not like they're not mutually exclusive in any way. And some may be positive, some may be negative. So let me post the link here. So just go to this link. I'm going to stop sharing and then I'm going to share again. And hopefully you can just see my Padlet. So the way that this works, if you go to the link, there's a button down here where you can write something beautiful, and then you could just write whatever you want, and then you could just publish it. So publish as many family functioning, what you think may be family functioning behaviors. And as they start to kind of populate, I'll just make some observations. A lot of people, well, a lot of you wrote communication, and that's very interesting. One, because obviously it's kind of like intuitive to have like good communication in any type of relationship that you have, but particularly for parent-adolescent relationships, communication, when you look at the literature across the board, parent adolescent communication tends to be like the most moderating, the most protective when we look at, like, if we had a model and we had like parent communication and parental monitoring and parental support may work for like one outcome, parental monitoring may work for another outcome, but parent adolescent communication tends to be very consistent across the board in that protective positive role in parent-adolescent relationships. So another one that I see is like emotional bonds and support. And so yeah, that parent support that they provide, um, advice, parental monitoring. There's this one here about independence and codependency. It's very interesting. I mean, I particularly do most of my research in the adolescent population, but this developmental stage between like childhood, then early adolescent, middle, and older adolescence as adolescents enter young adulthood, it's kind of like this crazy like roller coaster for kids and their parents because they went from this phase of childhood where they're very codependent, particularly the child on the parent, and then they enter adolescence and it's just kind of this it's so diverse for every family. It's like there's no one way to implement something that will work for every family because every kid starts to explore their autonomy at different times. Some kids may kind of rely on their parents for much longer, while other kids just, start to, hang out with their friends a lot more and things like that. There's gender differences across the board. So that's why I kind of love this developmental stage because they just go through so much. And as a parent, I mean, I'm not a parent, but as parents, they have to kind of, they have to adapt very quickly as their adolescent changes and make sure that, the continuing to have this positive relationship is very hard and very confusing. And there's no right or wrong way, but kind of trying to keep everything in balance. So yeah, so these are great. Yeah. So these are some for sure, but there's so many more. So there's parental monitoring, parent-adolescent communication, family cohesion, and what we don't really like see a whole lot, for example, discipline came up, which is could be good and it could be bad, just depending on how we just talked about it. Like if discipline is used in an unhealthy way where the child is getting punished, or maybe the parent expects too much discipline from the adolescent, it could backfire. But there are several family functioning behaviors that are also negative. So family conflict falls under family functioning behaviors like, disagreements and things like that. Those are all normal and, they're part of life. But if you have a lot of family conflict, starts to become like a negative thing in an adolescent's life, and it can very much influence them, you know, taking risk or like, taking more risks than they should be doing. Another one is we'll talk a little bit about parental monitoring. And parental monitoring, if you look at the literature, I would say that it's fairly inconsistent with the role that parental monitoring plays because, it's, for example, with social media or adolescents having their own devices, parental monitoring is very much recommended, recommended to look at like the security on their phone, what they're looking at, things like that. But as adolescents kind of go through this stage and they're getting older and older, too much parental monitoring can kind of increase conflict between the and the adolescent. Like the kid may want to like begin to keep secrets, which is normal, or want to keep information to themselves. And if a parent is like implementing too much monitoring, it could also backfire. So there's both positive and negative family functioning. So family function is not necessarily like always, something that you're like, oh, it's great across the board. Let's just build family-based interventions that improve family functioning. Like, so you always have to think about like where the adolescent is in their developmental stage. Okay, so let me stop sharing again and go back to sharing my presentation. Okay. So yeah, so we talked about how family functioning refers is like this big umbrella. You have parental involvement, parental monitoring, supervision from the parent, parent-adolescent communications. Those are the main ones that I look at in my research. But how does this all help? So adolescents are trying to cope with like all these normative developmental changes. They're going through, biological changes. They're going through, you know, social changes in their like peer group circle as their peer group circle grows, as they become independent, as they make their more independent decisions, as things start to happen to them outside of the supervision of the parent. They have to kind of make decisions in the moment by themselves without, parental advice. So having a positive family environment helps them cope with those things that they're going through. Um, like I said, family functioning has a varied effects depending on the different developmental stage that the adolescent is in and their need for autonomy. Like I said, some kids may really want autonomy very early on. Some may still rely on their parents a lot. And so it's up to the parents to set like healthy boundaries and restrictions, like rules, but in a healthy way around adolescent behavior. So, for example, substance use behaviors, having that open line of communication, talking about some of the boundaries, like especially for older adolescents as they're in high school, like you may see this, you may be like in contact with this, um, and not just being like setting unrealistic expectations for adolescents. Like if you see that, like call the cops. Like they're not going to do that. So like we have to be realistic. So I want to talk like now more specifically in some of these behaviors. So like I said, adolescent parent communication like came up a lot. You all kind of indicated that communication is one of the ones that you think that family functioning involves. And so like I said, adolescent parent communication is pretty consistent across research, suggesting that it's positive influence on adolescent behaviors. And the way that it works is that parents and adolescent communicate. It may seem intuitive, but um there's like certain characters that play certain roles, but so parent communication and with adolescents is a means to an end. So parents and adolescents are communicating because as a parent you want to continue to be involved in your adolescent's life. You want to know about the things that they're feeling, the things that they're doing. So it's a way of increasing parental knowledge, on the parents' end. And as adolescents transition from childhood to adolescence and they begin to explore their autonomy, um, this this particular exchange of information becomes less and less. So kids tend to want to keep things to themselves. Like if they see something on social media that they think that their parents may not approve of, they keep that to themselves. But if the parent doesn't really know what to ask or so yeah, if the parent doesn't know what to ask, they may miss out on that information. They may not know that the adolescent is getting exposed to certain things on certain channels. So there's two players in the parent-adolescent communication dynamic. You have the adolescent and then you have the parent. And so the role that the parent plays is that they should be soliciting information. So a parent solicitation is where the parent asks questions, just like benign, non-intrusive questions like, how was your day at school? Like, do you have homework? Things like that. So the parent starts to solicit information. And then adolescents, their role is to just disclose information, but in a voluntary way, so that things become kind of like um, hairy when when the parent starts probing, and the adolescent maybe not be ready to disclose, and they just probe and probe and probe, and that becomes that makes the adolescent kind of like shut down. They don't want to like share anymore, or if they disclose something and the parent reacts in a negative way. So there's like these things. So it should be like open lines of communication, but it's a very hard like situation to manage. So when we look at parent-adolescent communication and adolescent disclosure and parental solicitation, you may start to wonder, like, because this is all happening across time for different kids, you may start to wonder, do parents start soliciting information because they sense that something is wrong? Or do they start to solicit information before something happens and then they're like prepared? Or does an adolescent disclose something after it already happened? Or are they like disclosing as it's happening to them? So I was very interested in kind of like the path that these would take. So I just kind of want to talk about a quick study that I did. So I was examining this like bidirectional association between these behaviors that we've been talking about and adolescent depressive symptoms and conduct problems. So my question was really like, are adolescents experiencing like depressive symptoms and conduct problems, and that like influences them to disclose to their parent, or like I said, like the parent noticed something and they start to solicit more information, and or is it just like the natural way? So this was the model that I hypothesized. It was just, it kind of looks like really complicated, but it's not. It's just these behaviors leading to the other behaviors. And so these were the results. Does anyone want to take a guess at what these results mean? So the only lines that are, so you see how there's like a lot of lines here, and then there's not as many lines over here. So the lines that exist in this second model are just the ones that were significant. So these are like the true results. Does anyone want to take a guess at what this looks like, or how to interpret this in any way? No? Okay, I'll go. Um, so basically, we see that there's a lot of lines going from this side to this side. I thought that, and then most of these lines are going this way to this way. So you see, you have like some negative numbers and some positive numbers. And so what this negative number here means is that adolescents disclosing was negatively predicting their depressive symptoms at time 2. So it means that adolescents would disclose, and they would experience less depressive symptoms. But then you see this positive number, and it indicates that parent solicitation was positively influencing depressive symptoms. So what do we think about that? What do we think like is happening here? Like, why would adolescent disclosure be negative, but then parent solicitation be positive? Like, it's increasing adolescent depressive symptoms.
Could there maybe be like a relationship with parental trust? The adolescent just feels maybe just kind of less than, kind of below their parents. That could be contributing. Whereas if they're voluntarily telling, they feel more secure and confident in that relationship, which makes their overall mental health stronger, maybe.
Yeah, so if an adolescent is like maybe disclosing, maybe they're like ready to talk about this situation. If they're experiencing depressive symptoms, maybe they're ready to talk about it, and that decreases their depressive symptoms. It's so kind of like this empowering thing. But if a parent is like soliciting and a kid is maybe not ready, like that may increase their depressive symptoms. Maybe the parent is like asking questions, but maybe they don't really know how to talk. So like if I asked you, hey, are you like depressed? And then you said, yeah, I kind of don't feel that great. And then I was like, you know, drink more water, or like, hope you feel it. Like that doesn't help. Like if you solicit information and you ask somebody like if they're feeling okay, but then you don't have like the proper mechanisms to like help them or get them the help that they need, especially if it's like maybe like a more serious case, that does more harm than good. And so the questions here were very like the parent solicitation questions were very broad, so they're not very specific. And so it could be that as well. And then we see that depressive symptoms was positively related to conduct problems. So obviously, you know, there's always like kind of like these co-occurring behaviors with adolescents. If they're feeling like some type, if they're experiencing some adverse outcomes, they're probably experiencing more than one. These behaviors don't occur in isolation. Okay, so good. So another family functioning behavior that I want to talk about is parental support. This one also came up, and parental support is important. It has come out as like, a protective factor against risk outcomes. But there are, different types of there's different types of support. And so, for example, there's emotional, informational, and appraisal. Those are all forms of social support. And so a parent can provide emotional support, like if the kid is feeling bad, they can like make them feel better, hug them, smile at them, like that, provide that type of support. There's also informational support. So for like example, like we talked about the depression example. So if a kid's like, I don't feel good, like, what do you think? And the parent doesn't really know like anything about depression, maybe they've never experienced depression, and they can't really inform the adolescent, that's that may not help. So informational support is also really important. Like um, if they know, if they can identify risk factors for depression, or if they can identify ways to get support, help for depression, things like that. And then appraisal is when a parent says like, you're doing a great job, or like, good job. It's kind of like that building their self-confidence situation. So so an adolescent needs all three of these. And so parents, sometimes can provide that emotional support, but it's very important to, when we integrate parental support into interventions, that we take into consideration that it's like all three of these, and not just like a parent saying like, I'm here for you, or something like that. But parental support has been shown to be a buffer or a moderator. Do we know what those things are when we talk about them? So a buffer is like, for example, if a peer is talking to an adolescent about drugs, that may lead to an adolescent using drugs. It's like a very consistent, relationship there. But if a parent exists in that system of the adolescent, and they are there to be supportive, if they provide emotional support, information, appraisal, things, they buffer that relationship. So even if an adolescent is exposed to their peers telling them like, hey, drugs are really great, like you're going to really love this, because they have parental support, that stops that association from happening, or at least it lessens it, So that's what we consider like a buffer or a moderator. So in this model that I often use in my research, the stress buffering model, I use a lot of these family functioning behaviors as buffers. Like they'll kind of lessen the relationship between a bad thing and a bad thing happening. So we use this model quite a bit when we talk about like family functioning. Another thing to consider is familism. So familism, again, falls underneath the big umbrella of family functioning, but is often considered a cultural construct. So for certain cultures, like I talked about, some cultures that are more collectivistic, familism is like really important. And traditionally, like what you would see in the literature is that familism has been conceptualized as like a Hispanic cultural construct. So familismo is what we kind of see in the literature. But from my research, I think feminismo is very important. It does explain a lot of things that happen in the Hispanic culture. But from my research, is what we see is that feminism or feminismo is very consistent across race and ethnic groups in children and early adolescence. So all of them across the board, regardless of whether you're Hispanic or not, believe in feminismo. Feminismo is very protective in this realm. It's really when kids start to grow up. There are some cultures that emphasize, like, we still have to communicate. You still live under my roof, like your life is my life situation. And like it's when kids start to grow up to be older that some cultures are allows like more permissiveness, so allow them to explore their autonomy more than others. And so that's when feminism or feminismo starts to differentiate across race and ethnic groups. But really during this childhood and early adolescence time, it's very similar across kids. It's protective regardless across any race or ethnic group. And like we talked about, family functioning, it doesn't always have to be good and it's not always bad. So parental support, we would think like, oh, it always is good. It's always going to be like a good thing to, build into interventions and just tell parents, just support your kid. It'll be fine. And honestly, we always have to conceptualize when we tell a parent, like, improve your parental support and your kid will be fine. We have to conceptualize what that means. So sometimes it could be good, sometimes it can be bad. And I'll show you here. So this is another paper that I wrote. And then I kind of looked at all these different levels of parental support. And I won't ask you to interpret this because this one's a little bit more complicated. But again, I looked at depressive symptoms and conduct problems. And what you see here in the parent support is that they're both negative. So what we think, what it shows here is that parental support was negatively associated with both depressive symptoms and conduct problems in kids. And I had looked at the effect of relational victimization, which is just when kids kind of like, victimization is kind of like bullying. It's like falls under this like bullying realm. But relational victimization is when kids are like saying things about each other, like saying negative things about each other. So it's not like physical bullying, it's more of like this like verbal. And so the effects of racial victimization on these two outcomes. And so when you do this interaction, I wanted to see like this buffering effect. So I tested like, does parent support buffer this relationship between relational victimization and depressive symptoms and conduct problems? And we see that for depressive symptoms, it does. It still has that negative association. So that's great. But if you look over here at conduct problems, it's positive. So actually what this means is that when a kid is experiencing relational victimization and they're experiencing parental support, they actually increase their conduct problems. So that's like not great. So any like guesses? I thought I came up with a really good explanation in this paper, but any guesses like to why this may happen? No? Okay, so I'll tell you kind of like what I guessed. So after these results, it's my job to interpret like what I think this is, right? Based on the literature and based on what I know. So my guess here was that we talked about informational appraisal and emotional support. And my guess was that a kid experiences relational victimization. They go to their parent for support, and the parent may say, if you're experiencing bullying, just do it right back, or give them what, like show them, don't stand up to your bullies or like blah, 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 blah. That's informational support that the parent provided. Say like, in my day, like I stood up to my bullies and then they'll stop bullying you again. So that increases those conduct problems that a kid may be experiencing. Like they go back to school, maybe someone says something and they get involved in like a fight. And so not great advice, I think. But that's just the way that the parent may know to support the kid at that time. And so that's what I said when we tell parents, parental support is very important. We want to also, you can't just tell a parent that and not give them the resources or the skills on how to support an adolescent in like the appropriate way. So that was like my guess. What do y'all think? Was that like a good guess of why that explained? To me, it made sense because I remember being bullied and my dad just telling me like, oh, just stand up for yourself. I'm like a tiny kid and I'm like, I don't think that's gonna work for me. But so yeah. And then I just want to talk briefly about some populations, some adolescent populations that may not have like as much evidence supporting like how they experience family dynamics and things like that, but it is still like very important. So there's not like a whole lot of research. There's more now, but at the time of this study, there wasn't like a whole lot of research on the family environment and what happens when Hispanic kids, disclose their sexual orientation to their parents. And so, just in general, sexual minority youth experience disproportionate risk in a lot of realms: drug use, sexual risk behaviors, depression. They, you think that just race, ethnic minority kids experience a lot, sexual minority youth experience a lot more. And so, one of the reasons that this may happen, particularly in some cultures, is that as sexual minority youth begin to experience their sexual orientation and sexual identity, um, in families that may be not as accepting, disclosure or like the disclosure of their identity or sexual orientation may become a very difficult time for an adolescent. They may know that like if they tell this to their family, it's going to change the entire dynamic of the family. So they may hide who they are, which we know is like not great for adolescents, like mental health and things like that. If they have to hide their identity, they may hide that to kind of just keep the peace or not like make any waves or anything like that. Especially if maybe they don't have a family member, anybody that they know that is like a sexual minority as well. So in this paper, we talked about sexual minority youth in the realm of the Hispanic culture. And so we talked about two cultural constructs called machismo and marianismo. So machismo is like this cultural construct where men or there's gender expectations and men are supposed to be the providers, they're the head of the household, they're masculine, they do they fix things and things like that. So that's the traditional role for males in this particular culture. And then marianismo is when the woman or like the female is a nurturer, she's like the mother, she's pure and they relate it a lot to the Virgin Mary. So in Marianismo in the Hispanic culture, women are supposed to be like the Virgin Mary, and so like motherly and very pure. And so this conflicts a lot with some with some adolescents as they start to begin to explore their sexual orientation and identity, and they don't fall into these two buckets. They may feel like they're like nurturing, but they may also feel like they don't want to be at home cleaning the house, or like a kid may be like, I don't want to lift weights or whatever. Like they don't want to fall into these like very specific buckets, and so that causes maybe like conflict within the family. So some of the themes that came out of this study was that we asked both the parent and the adolescent. So these are kids that had already disclosed their sexual orientation to their parents. So the parent already knew. So they were talking retrospectively about their experience during that time. So we asked the parents and the adolescents. So there were three themes that came up: interpersonal challenges, navigating disclosure, and conceptualizing acceptance. So interpersonal challenges were reported by both the parent and the adolescent. So the parents indicated that their interpersonal challenges that they experienced was that they love their kid very much, and they themselves were going to accept their child and whatever happened, but they didn't know how to deal with other family members or with like a dad or with like grandparents or things like that. So the parent felt a lot of like challenges, and it was a hard time for them. And then the kid also felt these challenges because they didn't want to disappoint their family members. They didn't know when to tell their family. They didn't want people like talking bad about their family or things like that. And so the kid felt a lot of, interpersonal conflict in the decision to disclose their sexual orientation. So it was happening to both parent and adolescent. Um, Navigating disclosure. So, for example, the adolescent had to decide when was the appropriate time to tell. Like, how do I tell my parent? Which one of my parents do I tell? Do I tell my sibling? So the adolescent had to navigate all that. And then after disclosure, then it was the parent's job to kind of navigate disclosure. Because if a kid just told their mom, for example, now the mom had the responsibility of either like, do I keep this secret? If my kid asked me to keep this secret, do I tell the dad, who is possibly like an equal partner in that relationship? And so then the parent also had to navigate how to disclose or not disclose that information. And then the last thing that came up was conceptualizing acceptance. And so this was like an area of conflict for both the adolescent and the parent. So the adolescent indicated, a lot of our adolescents indicated that the parent said they accepted, but they weren't acting like they accepted. And then the parent would say, I do accept my child. I love them very much. I just don't know how, like what they want from me, like in terms of acceptance. So conceptualizing acceptance was very different. So the adolescent had this idea that they wanted their parent to do certain things. And the parent was like, this is as much as I can do for right now. Like, I can't, like, they would say, like, I love you very much, or I accept your sexual orientation, but like, please don't bring like a boyfriend or a girlfriend around that we're not used to and things like that. So there was like boundaries that the parent had set that those were not okay with the adolescent. So it kind of caused some conflict there. So all of this to say is that there's this, level of family functioning. And then there's like all of these different layers for all these different populations. And that's why it's very hard to develop interventions, because in general, you can say, oh, family functioning is great. Everybody just improve family functioning. But you have to really look at your population. You really have to look at the developmental stage that the child is in, like where the parents at. Like, it's not just a one size fits all situation. And so I believe a lot in like tailored interventions and things like that, especially when it comes to family functioning. So I talked a little bit about family-based interventions. So yes, in general, family-based interventions do seek to improve family functioning, certain different behaviors of family functioning, um, as an end goal to target some type of behavior. So I put up here kind of like an example of like sessions that would be involved in a family-based intervention. So for example, this parent session 1 is like parental investment in the adolescent worlds. Parents watch a video which reviews adolescent risk factors and how parents engage in, and then parents engage in an interactive exercise to set goals and boundaries in an adolescent's world, enhancing communication skills, family communication, family support. So every module has like a different goal, and they all kind of revolve either about targeting the adolescent risk or targeting these family functioning behaviors. So unfortunately, or fortunately and unfortunately, most of the time the parents that are involved in family-based interventions tend to be the mothers. So there's a huge push in like the research that we really want to get the fathers involved. Like, we want to get them in there because, the family unit, let's say the mother comes and she's like very invested in the positive development of the child. But then you have this like intervention, the kids involved, the mom's involved, then they go home into this environment. And because we didn't intervene on all the family members, there's a chance that this intervention is not really going to have any effect to begin with, because everybody has to be involved. Just the mother may do some, may play a role, but if the father says something that's conflicting with what they just learned in the intervention, we know that it won't go very far. So oftentimes the people that are involved in interventions are mothers. But we do know that we have greater effects if more than one family member is involved in family-based interventions. Additionally, most family-based interventions are face-to-face or in a group setting, and so they're very resource heavy. Like you have to have a facilitator, you have to have scheduling for all these parents. And so family-based interventions tend to be semi-short, what I would consider short. So for example, this intervention has 8 sessions, and then they had 4 face-to-face one-on-one sessions with each family. And so in a total of 12 sessions across 12 weeks. That's a really that's a long time, but short relative to everything that a parent and a child is going to go through, let's say in a year, right? And so we have these interventions that are relatively short, and then we expect them to have very long lasting effects. So we have to build a really good intervention for it to have long-term effects with just kind of 12 sessions. And then pre and post, you want to see that both the outcomes of the behaviors for the adolescent decrease, whatever you were targeting. And then you also want to improve these family functioning behaviors. So you want to take whatever family you have and say they both kind of scored low on parent-adolescent communication. You want to improve that score across this intervention. And oftentimes it is done. I mean, even just assessing a parent and an adolescent on these family functioning behaviors can serve as an intervention without even having to do the intervention, because the parent starts to retrospectively think am I asking my kid how their day is? And they start to implement these behaviors even without the intervention. And so now I just kind of want to talk about a little bit about my current research and what I'm doing with family functioning. So I have a lot of experience with face-to-face interventions and, in-person interventions, family-based interventions. And what I see is that they're, like I said, very resource heavy. You have to have a lot of resources, a lot of money to widely implement this intervention. And one thing that I learned after COVID is that we switched all of our in-person interventions to online, and that didn't, it slowed us down a little bit, but it was really not that huge of a change. We thought that we were going to have a lot of barriers to parents, being able to work Zoom or, being able to take these interventions online. And what actually happened was that they just were very quick with it. Oftentimes we kind of underestimate the potential of our participants. And what I learned from during COVID was that our participants are ready for online interventions. And so I started to think about ecological momentary assessment, which is a way to assess people on a daily basis through an app, and then and see and provide interventions based on these assessments. So there's a lot of research studies that show that in general, most studies assess family functioning on an aggregate level. So they assess family functioning at baseline and then after an intervention. And they say in general, across the last 90 days, how is your family functioning? That's a long time for a kid. 90 days is almost an entire summer. And so very little is known about what parents go through day by day. So if they experience one fight, or then they're fine for a couple of days, and then they get into another fight again. But in general, their family functioning is okay. So through EMA, we can assess family functioning on a daily level. So these assessments come up in an app through a smartphone, and they're actually very popular. They're becoming very popular as a means of assessing. So this is just kind of what we kind of just an example of a prompt that a kid would get on their apps. So for example, my parents and I eat dinner together, yes, no. They're very brief questions, and they just answer the questions every day. And then we look at all the data after the study is over and see kind of the fluctuating reports of their family functioning across time. So this is just a study that I'm working on now. But the end goal is really to develop these tailored intervention messaging. So like I said, sometimes these interventions are a one size fits all. We hope that it will work for everyone, or at least we know that it will work for most of them. But my goal is really to develop tailored intervention messaging. So for example, if a kid said, oh, I got in a fight with my parent today, they would get an intervention module or an intervention message that day, and not wait until like the next session where they have like a week from now when they have to meet with their facilitator on one-on-one basis. By then they may be better, they may be worse, but they would get an intervention through EMA. They would answer a question and get an intervention that day based on whatever they indicated. So that's really all I have. Does anybody have any questions? Has anybody done any type of family work in any other realm? Cool. Maybe you should integrate it in some capacity. No worries if there's no question. I understand it's a Friday. I also would not have any questions. But yeah, if you do have any questions, feel free to email me. And if you're interested in this work, feel free to reach out. And I'm always looking for people to help.
Thank you, Dr. Fernandez.
Of course. Oh, let me start sharing.
Any other questions before we go ahead and end the meeting, guys? All right. Y'all have a good rest of your day.
All right. Thanks. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.